Hello everybody and welcome back to the Jack Threlfall Show, brought to you by Sports.com here in the heart of the Monaco Grand Prix. I'm joined today by Martin Whitaker, CEO of the Saudi Motorsport Company. It's a pleasure to have you here, Martin. How have you found the Monaco Grand Prix this year so far?
It's been great. A lot of people.
Yep.
As always, very difficult to get from A to B.
Absolutely.
But having said that, it's a lot of fun. A lot of people enjoying themselves. Bit of everything in terms of the weather, some rain and some nice sunshine.
Absolutely.
And I think everybody's looking forward to kick-starting everything tomorrow.
Fantastic. So could you give, for the audience, just a bit of an explanation about your background in motorsport? When did you first join Formula One?
Well, I first started out in journalism back in the 80s, and then I then went and worked for the RAC Motorsports Association,
Right.
governing body of the sport in the UK, and shortly after that joined Bernie Eccleston's organisation at FOM, as it then was. I suppose it was then Poker.
Fantastic.
And so that was really when my Formula One career started. A couple of spells at the FIA, spell with Bernie and McLaren during the glory years of the Honda Morton McLaren.
Absolutely.
With Ayrton and Gerhardt, and then on to back to work for Max Mosley.
Right. So some iconic figures in your past there across the history.
Yeah, well, so I worked for Blest, I worked for Ron, for Bernie and for Max, and then on to Ford, where I was the director of motorsport during that sort of golden era of having the World Rally Championship team with Colin McRae and Carlos Sainz and Peter Solberg, and shifting the team from Boreham up to M Sport in Cumbria with Malcolm. So yeah, good times, and then
Fantastic.
After that, ending up in Bahrain and running the circuit there.
Fantastic.
Bit of everything.
So was it motorsport a passion for you from a very young age? You said you came from a journalism background. Was it sports journalism, news journalism?
Well, it was sports journalism, and I really fell into it, to be honest. So I'd always had a love for motorsport. I mean, my hero was Ronnie Peterson.
Awesome.
And I think, I didn't follow it avidly, but at the same time, I had an interest in it at the school. And I think it was school friends who effectively got me into it. And so, one thing led to another, and really, because I started out farming.
Right.
So
It's very different.
a bit of a different job from where I am today.
So would you say Formula One has evolved since you joined it, and in what ways would you characterise that? Do you think it sort of entered like a professional era in the maybe late 80s, early 90s?
I think I was quite lucky to be in it in that sort of period when I was at the RAC, for example, the RAC Motorsports Association was very much, if you like, the promoter of the Formula One race. So in those days we were at Silverstone and Brands Hatch, and alternating year on year. I suppose it wasn't long after the championship really, Bernie had got involved and really started to get hold of it and make sure that it was a championship rather than a championship and then other individual races.
Sure.
So it was very much a Formula One World Championship with no other individual races on the side. And so, in a way, I think I was very lucky to be involved in it at that point. Some great names involved at the time. Obviously, you had Nigel winning his championship, and Williams were dominant, and then you had the fantastic era of Senna and Prost and what have you. So, but I think the sport, clearly it's evolved. Look at it today. I think you could sense that it was going in that direction back in those days.
Towards a more heavily publicised, promoted element.
Bernie, it was much more regimented under Bernie.
Right.
Clearly the rights were vitally important to him, and it was those rights that allowed the teams to get bigger and succeed and be better. And it also allowed the promoters to do a better job. And obviously there was there was a selection process in terms of the races, and not every race survived.
Sure.
But it was the beginning of that sort of professional era where television rights were king, if you like, and the sport was in a better place. The global audience was just going
absolutely
up and up and up and up. And I think the result of that is what we see today.
And would you say it's also evolved many times in that technical sense? Is there an era that you maybe long for in the past when we look at today's technical regulations versus what we've had in the past?
I suppose in a sense there was more freedom of design and
creativity.
I was just going to say, I think it was more creativity technically. Cars sounded better.
Yep.
But at the same time, as the evolution of the sport has developed, obviously there's a lot of other elements that have come into it. I think it's far more safety nowadays, which obviously is a very good thing. I would suggest that the freedom of the regulations or the the relative freedom of the regulations in that era when I started, perhaps made for greater variety of racing.
For sure.
You had more winners, which I clearly was a good thing, and I think everybody would like to see that return.
Yeah, absolutely.
But essentially, I think the sport, in one sense, it still has an attraction. It still has that buzz. It has that vibrancy. It's got a phenomenal character and colour to it. The audience is continually growing, whether it's in TV or whether it's in physical spectators.
For sure.
It is a very special sport. I mean, look, it's the pinnacle of motorsport worldwide.
Absolutely, and I think for me, when I look at the history of media in Formula One, one figure that stands out as a personal inspiration and to any motorsport fan would be Murray Walker, right? Such an icon of the TV world, the voice, and across motorsport too, beyond Formula One. Did you have many interactions with Murray? What's your memory of his legacy?
I knew Murray very well, and he had that sort of infectious enthusiasm, didn't he? And he had that sort of, he played it off against people like James Hunt. And, James was very special as well, as you can imagine.
For sure.
But yeah, I think Murray had that ability of, his voice was just enthusiasm personified, and I've read a number of articles about the way in which his tone and his pitch changed. But I think he brought the sport to the masses. Yeah. And everybody knew Murray, everybody loved Murray. A very special individual.
And the drivers too. I think one of the things that was so, just looking in from the outside, infectious about his personality was that, for example, two drivers, maybe like Senna and Prost, that had such an intense rivalry, would both share their feelings with Murray and kind of bring that story to the audience, where they would never share them with each other, but you kind of got to experience that. They kind of empathized with the enthusiasm that he had and didn't allow that negative element to feed too much into the media.
It's very true, and I think that was an era when journalists had a greater affinity or greater relationship with the drivers. It was much closer then. Now, and it's understandable now, there are many, many more pressures on the drivers and on the teams. But in those days, and it wasn't that long ago,
for sure,
there was the journalists. There was a body of journalists. That you had the Alan Henrys, the Nigel Roebucks, the Douglas Jenkinsons, the Morris Hamiltons of this world, like Murray, who would travel to every single race. And as a result, they were on the planes, they're in the hotels, they were in the Formula One paddock, they're in the restaurants afterwards. The sport was more open then, and as a result, I think there's probably more of a trust between the drivers and the journalists.
For sure.
And as a result, people like Murray were able to build those personal relationships, which is much more difficult to do today.
And you mentioned how that transition in trust has changed. We're just coming off an example that I think is perfect for this conversation this week, where I think 2 days ago in one of the big Italian sports papers, there was a front page story, Lewis Hamilton offered a contract by Ferrari, and then Lewis has had, in a press conference today, completely denied it. I suppose we'll never know the truth directly to where that truth lies, whether he got a contract, whether it was a negotiation tactic to try and influence what his Mercedes price will be. But do you feel that adds a negative element to the journalism when there's that culture of leaks and try that search for exclusivity? There's a breakdown in the trust.
Possibly, yes. But at the same time, I don't think the fact that a journalist is still a journalist. He wants to get a story. Sure. And there were plenty of rumours in those days as well. Sure. Don't forget. So I don't think we can really judge the overall playing field on that side of it. But there again, clearly I've heard the story as well. There's no smoke without fire, in my opinion.
Interesting.
There you go.
So how does the transition happen then from being on the media responsibility side of Formula One to track development and managing new logistical projects like building the track in Bahrain? Because that is a huge investment, a track that is now responsible for the testing in Formula One as well as the first Grand Prix of the last 2 years. What was that transition like? What motivated you to kind of make that jump to building something in Formula One?
Well, I'm not sure. I think I almost probably fell into it. I mean, at the end of the day, I was invited by Bernie with the organisation I was working for at the time to look at the new circuits, which was China and Bahrain. So I worked initially on the new Chinese circuit, and then almost at the same time again on Bahrain, and then the Bahrain race actually was swapped with China. And so initially Bahrain was going to be, I think, in October 2004. Right. And then I think Bernie very quickly realised that the Chinese circuit just was not going to come together in time. They were going to be in April. So I think he immediately got in touch with the Crown Prince in Bahrain and said, look, could you speed up the construction of your circuit and swap the dates? And so I came on board, I think, in the September of 2003 and worked on the first race, which was, an extraordinary experience. A first race in the Middle East.
And a new audience for Formula One.
New audience, building a brand new circuit in a very special environment. I mean, the Bahrainians had a real affection with Formula One. There was a huge trust between Bernie, between the sport and particularly the Crown Prince. And I think you can see, and it's still there today. So for me, it was, being involved in the construction of that circuit and then going on to manage that circuit and taking it from one race a year to whatever it was. I think we ended up sort of doing almost 600 events during a calendar year. Not all of them big events, but there was something happening all the time on the track. And so in a way, the opportunity to do exactly the same thing in Jeddah, albeit for me being asked to go and help run the Grand Prix in Jeddah, but then realising that actually my role was actually working with Prince Khalid, my chairman, to actually work on the physical side of bringing together and chairing meetings on construction, which really I haven't got an awful lot of experience with. But to start building a circuit on May the 1st and running the first race on December the 5th was a pretty tall order. A challenge, to say the very least. But I think you realise that whether you've got the skills or whether you've got the experience to do it, somebody's got to do it. And the two of us basically sat there and did it.
And when we look at the design of circuits in Formula One, the figure that stands out in the modern era is Herman Tilke, right? Has your experience been working with him? He's had so much influence as to the new circuits we're seeing added, and of course his son was the designer of the Saudi circuit. How do you see the legacy of Tilke's influence in Formula One?
Well, I mean, I don't think, maybe you've done your calculations. I'm not sure how many circuits he's actually put his pen to, but it's a lot now. And he has been, as you rightly say, he's been very, very influential. He's not the only circuit designer out there, and there's some very good circuit designers out there. But at the same time, I think what Herman brings to the party is that he's a calming influence. And the demands of building a track in the modern era are pretty intense, because you've got to get it right. I mean, we saw this last year in Miami where the surface wasn't right. So one of our major challenges in working with Herman and with the team at Unimac, for example, the contractor in terms of the circuit in Jeddah, was to ensure that we got the right infrastructure, that the facilities were right, that predominantly we had to make sure that the surface was right, that it was billiard table flat, that it got grip. And if you remember, everybody in the media would say, "Oh, it's not having any grip, it's going to be slippy, nobody's going to like it, etc., etc." And of course, we knew as soon as it went down that this was going to be a fantastic surface. And super fast track, long track, built in a really, really extraordinary manner. I mean, to be involved in the way in that track, and particularly the tarmac was laid, because you don't do it in sort of just bits and pieces. You just keep going. Because machines are feeding all the way around. 3 machines in echelon going around at the same time. And then to get, I think it was Valtteri Bottas on the first practice to come on the radio and say this track is awesome.
Of course,
was just the defining moment. And then every single driver was saying, look, this is a super track. So it was a defining moment. It was a great moment for everybody involved. Everybody involved in the construction of the circuit. Actually the most important bit, and that was the bit that you raced on, was absolutely perfect.
And to get that approval as well from Formula One, we know the pinnacle of motorsport, all the best drivers in the world, you couldn't have a better audience to be testing your new project on, right? To get that feedback from them must have been so satisfying.
I mean, it was a culmination of everything coming together. And look, as I said, we started on May the 1st. I mean, there's nothing there. There was nothing there. And you think that you built a Formula One World Championship circuit between basically May the 1st, and you ran the first race on December the 5th. And, essentially you had to be ready a week earlier than that. And we weren't just ready.
Right.
But it was a culmination of everybody. So as I said, it was Unimac, it was the FIA, it was F1, it was people like Michael Massey. I mean, Michael was with us the entire time throughout that build process. Gave us huge support in making sure that everything was exactly where we wanted, because we needed the help.
For sure.
And so, but everybody pulled together, and it was a remarkable it was remarkable to see it come to fruition. And I think all of us, you know, whether you were a Saudi, whether you were an expat, or wherever you came from, there was an immense moment of pride when the cars turned their first wheels that Friday afternoon.
Absolutely, and as a motorsport fan, it's awesome to see the best drivers in the world challenged by something new, something that those high downforce corners, the fast corners, that the cars are at their best, right? That's the best element of a Formula One car, is the high cornering speed. I wanted to move on from.
And we also got we got some really good races. Those first two races, the third one wasn't quite so good, but the first two races were excellent races. You remember, was it the first one where Lewis effectively ended up tying on points after the race, going into Abu Dhabi?
Absolutely, it set up a pretty exceptional finale there. I wanted to look forward or on from Formula One to another brilliant series, Motorsport, that maybe doesn't get as much international attention, which would be the Aussie V8 Supercar series, where you also spent some time. To me, that is something that's so important for the national motorsport culture of Australia, right? It's dominated primarily by Australian drivers, by Australian engineers and sponsors. What was it for you that motivated you to make that transition to kind of add value to that business?
Well, I suppose I was asked to go there,
right?
Which sort of helped.
Yeah.
My own, I suppose, love affair with V8 Supercars is that I just think it is one of the best touring car series in the world, if not the best. And it is door-handle to door-handle racing, competing for every single inch of the tarmac.
Right.
Short, fast, intense racing. Great contact racing. Great onboard cameras, great footage, and also drivers who are so approachable.
Yeah.
And you know and I think maybe that's one thing we need to bring back into Formula One somehow. I know it's not easy, but there's got to be a way of doing it. You know, paddocks that are full of fans and drivers literally standing there signing autographs until the last fan has gone home.
Absolutely.
And that's, in my opinion, something which is completely, it's not unique to Aussie V8s, but it is, Aussie V8s in a sense leads the way. And then you've got phenomenal audiences.
Yeah.
And yes, you've got, I think this was one thing that Tony Cochran brought to the series all those years ago, was mixing music and racing. And having phenomenal concerts after each of the races, but also having an audience of it's based on camping and entertainment throughout the whole
festival.
It was a festival. You're absolutely right. It was like Glastonbury every other weekend in Australia, and this sort of touring army of people that literally went all around Australia, whether it's from Perth or whether it's to Darwin or whether it was to the Gold Coast or whether it was down to Melbourne and then into the centre. So there was something for everybody. And also the way in which the championship worked with the community. And I think in a sense, a lot of racing series have a lot, or could learn a lot from Aussie V8 Supercars. And you know, it is as good today as it was, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago.
Absolutely, and they've just entered a new technical generation, right? With
Generation 3 car or whatever.
Looking even faster, even angrier than they did before. And I think there's also an element, my family, we have family back in North Carolina probably watching this, and they're in NASCAR country, so to them that's their equivalent of what the Aussie V8 Supercars is to Australia. The idea that not only are you seeing a super fast racing car driven by a driver from your country that you feel represents you on track, that you can stand behind, but also it's in a car that feels accessible. It's a car that looks like a road car.
Exactly, and that makes a big difference, doesn't it? If you can relate to the vehicle that's on the track, even if it's not the one that you've got at home. And you remember there was that intense rivalry in V8s, and in a sense, it lost a bit of that because they brought other manufacturers in, and they had to do that, I think. But you know, there was that old Ford-Holden rivalry. You were either blue or you were red, and it was a bit like being a Man City or a Man United fan, or an Everton or a Liverpool fan. You were one side of you were one colour, and it split families. But at the same time, it was just, and it still is. There's a passion and a rivalry to a series like that, which, as I said earlier, I think a lot of other series can do well to learn from.
Absolutely. And one thing that's critical to motorsport for it to develop and be sustainably growing throughout the years is getting that next generation to come through. I suppose in many ways people like me that have this ambition to get into motorsport, to learn as much as possible and to provide value in some way. If you look back on your career, are there particular moments, particular decisions that you feel maybe could offer some advice for the next generation on how to make the right steps in the industry?
Yeah, I mean, I think listen, as long as you're good at your job and and I think communication skills are so important. And I think if you can communicate, then that's half the battle. And I'd like to think probably that's why I've got most of the jobs that I've got. Is because I think you've got the confidence to get on with people. You've got the confidence to be able to communicate with people. Communication is a skill that sadly not everybody has. But if you've got it, then use it to the maximum. I think what's exciting me nowadays, and certainly in the Saudi role, is that we as a company, so Saudi Motorsport Company, has effectively been charged with growing the development of the sport in Saudi Arabia. So in a sense, it's a blank canvas. So traditionally, there hasn't been a lot of racing in Saudi. There's been clearly a love of rallying. There's an obvious love of the automobile.
Yep, supercar culture is incredible.
I think what now is so good for me, and I think it's what gets me out of bed in the morning, is the fact that we're developing career paths for young people. And I think that's so exciting because, let's face it, the kids in Saudi Arabia are the new generation. You talked about generations, but the generations of cars are generations. Yep. The young people of Saudi are no different to you and I. They're a bit younger than us.
Sure.
But having said that, they were
richer, maybe.
Clothes. Maybe. But, they wear the same clothes. They speak the same language. They speak really good English. Yeah. They eat the same food. They listen to the same music. They drive the same cars. Maybe some of them better the cars that you and I drive. But nevertheless, they're no different. But they now have the opportunity to build a career in the sport. And I think, the UK has something like 50 or 60,000 people involved in the motorsport industry.
Right.
Now, Saudi is not going to get there overnight. But nobody said we can't start.
For sure.
And so whilst on one hand we're now building academies for karting and off-road and bikes to find young champions of the future, which is obviously also very important because you need those Saudi champions to grow further interest in the sport. To my mind, what's even more attractive is the fact that there are thousands of jobs that can be created within the sport in the kingdom. And the other nice thing is that we are now starting to build our own Saudi-owned or Saudi IP series.
Right.
So instead of importing events, we can actually start to build an event, whether it's a rally series or whether it's a racing series. We can start to build an event or a series or a championship in Saudi using young Saudi engineers, young Saudi technicians, young Saudi logistics people, young office workers who are going to be part of motorsport, which in turn will allow suppliers and component suppliers to be produced, and building businesses in Saudi Arabia which are built around this sort of relatively new business of motorsport. That to me is really exciting.
And I think what you mentioned there is exactly what we're here with Sports.com. This is the Sports.com boat in the Monaco Harbour, and I think that's a pinnacle of what their business is about. That power of sport to connect in something that no other thing really can for people. It's something that, for example, in the English Premier League, will get 50,000 people at 20 clubs per weekend to go and scream and sing for their teams. That connects with people in a way that few other things can, and in the job market, it allows people to get into a career as fulfilling as competing in motorsport, to be able to work, for example, on a car. You're designing the front wing of a car, then you get to see that car on the podium later on, right? That satisfaction that you're bringing to those young engineers is massively important. You mentioned earlier at your time with McLaren, you were with Ayrton Senna. We're here in Monaco this weekend, Ayrton Senna, known as the King of Monaco. Are there any particular stories or memories that you have with Ayrton that stand out, you reflect on his legacy?
Well, first I was extremely lucky to be able to work within that era and to work with him. And he was just an extraordinary individual. I mean, there's a lot of talk about people like Ayrton, like Michael Schumacher, that the perception that people had of them at the time was somebody who was very hard-nosed, tight, and tough. But at the same time, that was what they had to do. That's why they were successful in a race car. So in a sense, once they pulled their helmet on and dropped the visor down, that was their primary focus. But out of the car, they were just extraordinary people. I mean, they really were extraordinary. I mean, you look at what, and that's why they have such an extraordinary legacy. I mean, the Senna Foundation still continues to this day. Poor Michael and what he's been through is tragic, but it doesn't change the fact that he was a fantastic champion, and most importantly, a fantastic person.
Yep.
And by the way, a lot of the drivers are like that. It's just and we are very fortunate that we get the chance to see them and know them on a personal basis. Not everybody gets that chance.
No.
Maybe the increased media coverage of the sport that we see today allows those drivers into our homes a little bit more. But nevertheless, going back to your point, people like Senna were very, very special. And I feel extremely humble and honoured in a sense to work with them. Yeah, listen, I've worked with some extraordinary names in the sport during my career.
Feel free to name drop. This is the place to do it.
That's the thing. I mean, whether it is Ayrton or whether it was Michael or whether it was Rubens Barrichello, whether it was Jos Verstappen or Johnny Herbert, but then
Carlos Sainz Senior.
Well, going on to the rally pro, the chance to work with someone like Colin McRae or Carlos Sainz or Joachim Kankanen, Peter Solberg, just amazing characters in the sport, and to work with them, in some cases employ them, and to share their emotions, to share their success. And we did have a lot of success, particularly with Colin and Carlos, and even with Johnny at Stewart Grand Prix. We had that success, but also to see the downside when it wasn't so easy, and also see the battles between the drivers. Carlos and Colin had this intense rivalry. They get on fine outside the car, but inside the car, wow! I tell you what,
for sure, that was
difficult to manage. I mean, hats off to people like Malcolm Wilson who managed to achieve it, and he's carried on doing that
for sure,
year in, year out, and has been very successful and runs an extraordinary ship. But yeah, I suppose I've been really blessed to have been able to work with people like that, and also still be doing it.
For sure. And when you look at modern Formula One, are there drivers that particularly stand out that you feel embody a similar spirit to what Michael and Ayrton did back in the day?
Yeah, I think there are. I mean, it's probably look. I've been very lucky in a sense because I sort of knew Lewis when he was in shorts. I mean, wow, what a career he's had. Yeah. So I can't really comment on that because he is a superstar. But I think it's really nice to see some of the other drivers who are in the championship who have got personalities that come out. And you've got people like Carlos Sainz who clearly has, there's those intrinsic family values that you could see passed from father to son. And I think that's really nice to see. So, again, we talk with great emotion and passion and love in a sense for people like Ayrton. But the Ayrtons of yesterday are still in the championship today.
And when you look at the leadership in modern Formula One, right, we have Stefano Domenicali as our CEO. How do you reflect on, obviously he was team principal of Ferrari before making that move, I suppose, as you did, from working for a team to working for the central governing organisation of Formula One. How do you think he's developed the sport, particularly with the investment in the Middle East and the USA too?
I think Stefano's done a remarkable job. I mean, don't forget, he took over in a transitional period, which cannot be easy. He went from Bernie to the whole liberty issue. And the liberty, And first of all, I think the nice thing from my perspective with Stefano hasn't changed. He's still the same guy that I knew all those years ago when he was at Ferrari. Always accommodating. His office door was always open. He's tough, but he's fair. You know where you're going with him. There's no deviousness.
Sure. And
he's in a position now to be at the very top of a company that is doing extraordinary things for this sport. We've always talked about Formula One being the pinnacle of motorsport worldwide, and it is still the pinnacle. And if it's possible to increase the height of Mount Everest, to increase that pinnacle,
for sure,
and I think he and his team have done that.
So let's focus now on Sunday's race. That's what we're all here to watch. Do you think we can look away from Max Verstappen as a potential victory? Maybe Fernando Alonso looking maybe his best chance of the year with the nature of qualifying, the importance of qualifying in Monaco?
Yeah, look, I'm probably not the best person to talk to about this because I might
disagree with that.
My skills in terms of where I think people are going to be on the grid is probably pretty poor. But having said that, I think the one thing about Monaco, and we'd all love to see, let's be honest, we all love to see something. We talked about this again earlier on, didn't we? I think we'd all like to see another driver come through this year and win a race, somebody other than Max or Checo.